You know, I moved with my own, I have my own steam, I will be able to keep it on. Yeah.
Well, we've got a neat place to share with you. It's a specific place. So this session continues our exploration of the area of Philippi and Thessalonica. If you remember from last week, Philippi is in that northern area of Greece. Thessalonica is a little bit west and south, but not too awful far. So we're going to hit both of those today. It's also part of Paul's journey and path. But we've got a neat place. It's sort of named after a person. It's known as Lydia, although it's not like a village or a town, but that's just because it's famous for her. And y'all remember the story of Lydia?
The purple, she dealt in fabric.
Yep. She is the first documented convert in Europe. Again, it's moved out of what would have been that Middle East as you come across, out of Turkey and around. So first documented convert from Thyatira. So she's known as the Lydia of Thyatira. Now Thyatira is back again in Turkey, so it's not part of the trip that we had, and it's not part of that Philippi area, but evidently she came from there. That's how she was known, was from. She was a merchant. Now there's a little bit of ambiguity there, it's interesting. So it's just she was a dealer in the purple dye, in purple cloth. The way it's worded in Scripture,
She's a woman.
She's a woman. And that becomes interesting. So the ambiguity is, what was that role? What was she actually? Did she work for somebody that was a dealer, and she might have been an assistant, or was that her business? Could have been. Evidently, she was known enough for it. So, but there is that unknowns. What's her marital status? Doesn't say anything. She was there with the women along the waterway. It doesn't say if she was free or a servant. The context of the time period, she could have still been sort of an indentured servant working for somebody, or she could be totally independent. Now, she was down there again without any other apparent family. So if she was independent, was she moving around all by herself? Interesting things for the time. But it didn't seem that she was connected. It also didn't really talk about her social class, other than that expensive purple dye, which was really for royalty, and there's different ways of looking at it. So just some interesting things. We don't know anything else about Lydia as a person. But we do know that story of Paul going and talking with her, and then her deciding to be baptized. This is a really neat little baptismal chapel. Now this whole area is outside of the ancient ruins of Philippi, and that mount that you see going up this way is the old sort of Acropolis of Philippi, the old city. Now the ruins of Philippi are kind of around that way a little ways, the primary ruins area that we looked at the last time. And all of this is about 20 miles outside of the modern city of Cavallo. Or 20 minutes outside of Cavallo. Now, what happened is in the 1960s, the bishop, the Orthodox bishop of the area, sponsored the building of this chapel. It is a baptismal chapel. There is no worship services. It is not a sanctuary. We'll go inside in a minute. So it's not a sanctuary where you would go in for worship services. It's really just a special baptismal place. But it's really kind of neat. And you can see some of this dedicated. This is all tile work. I didn't try to get it closer, but that's all inlaid tile work, the way they made this signs. That's another angle so that you can see the old Acropolis of Philippi. And again, when you say Acropolis, that's a high place, in manner of speaking, the way they did it. So that was also a defensive area. People were coming in, you could get everybody at the top, and any army would have to try to climb their way up there while you're throwing, stones and spears and arrows and stuff like that. So that was your defensive place. This is part of the inside. Now it comes back, this is one of the first ones we've been able to see, the totally different style and theological mindset of the Orthodox tradition. This is classic Orthodox traditions, sort of iconography and interior design for worship spaces. You have images of Mary and maybe Jesus, you've got angels, you've got the different, and you can see around, you've got the apostles, you've got all these different kind of folks, and it's just, it's overwhelming. You can have a study of just that little thing and go on for hours of all of the symbolism that comes into it. Everything from, here's Jesus with his hand up and the fingers in a particular orange pose. And if you look at it, that does not look like an infant face.
No, we talked about that when you brought that.
Right, so you realize that all of this has the symbolism to it, and the angling of the heads and the hands and the colors that you have and which people, and you've got the little saint kind of things and who's holding what kind of things in their hands. All of that is symbolism, but all of that is in this baptismal space.
Each one of those ringlets going up the wall, up in the curve, there are different.
Yep.
Now, is that mosaic or is it fresco? Is it just paint?
There's different pieces. So there's areas where you could go back and look and see it would be tiled. Other things are painted. So on some of the flatter surfaces, that's more of a paint. In some of that back here, I think that's sort of like a gold tile kind of material that's placed on it.
It looks like those frescoes in the mountains.
Yep.
What's the name of that church? Have you been to that church?
In the mountains? I'm not sure which
Mountains,
one.
North Carolina.
Close to Boone.
Yeah, it's close to Boone, and it's a very famous artist did frescoes in the churches.
Yeah.
You can just go in there.
Different angle.
Oh my goodness.
This is the entrance area. So what you were just looking at was if you go in here and through there, that was the little area in the back. This is the entrance area. Now, part of that Orthodox tradition really places an emphasis on a sense of the transcendence of God. Transcendence being God above. God that is awesome and inspiring. God is also with us. It's not a separation, but it's the intent to help us remember that God is above and beyond our understanding, our comprehension. It's not, Jesus is my friend. It's not that thought pattern. They don't want to deny that Jesus loves us and has a relationship, but their emphasis is the transcendent God that has become immanent to us. Not the immanent God, which is our friend. It's just a different, I think a different humility of relationship. But it can sometimes almost feel like less personal than Jesus is my friend. So it's not trying to be right or wrong, it's their emphasis. It's their emphasis to it. But all of that, when you start seeing, and this is that chapel's reasonably small. When you look at some of the big cathedrals, you realize what that space is like when they have this huge, tall, arcing space, and you just, the idea is it takes you sense of, here's this transcendent God. And all the awesomeness.
This art is in the 60s.
This was all done in the 1960s, 1970s. The 60s was when they commissioned it.
And so local artists, I guess.
I have no idea what the history is of who they brought in to do it. But it's still, if you go into Orthodox, and it's kind of like, as much as Christ the Good Shepherd, somebody might say, eventually their dream is probably something soon. That would be their dream. And you can see like the Orthodox Cathedral in downtown Charlotte, as they go, and some of these it's continuing. When we get to Meteora, at the tail end of this, you'll see that there's some things there on some of these, some of the monasteries at Meteora that are still under development for the interior, even though they've been there for 500 years. Because it's just how fast, it's not a rush. There's always more to do. Because you can kind of say, yeah, we can do more. we can do more. And a design process, and who's going to do it, and how long does it take? This is the interior of the domed region up at the top. Just a bit more. And it's Lydia. So now you see the interior of the central dome. Now there's your baptismal.
And do
there's
they
that
use
back
it?
It does get used. See, there's a whole scheduling. I have no idea who you have to talk to schedule there.
Wow, it just goes up.
It just goes up. And that was that dome that you saw on the outside. They all traditionally have a dome element like that to it.
But the baptistry itself looked pretty simple.
Yeah, just simple marble. There's a lot of marble there. Wears very well. And the whiteness to all the marble. Even without, during the day, you don't need lights inside. There's enough windows, and that brightness of the white marble just opens up the space. Now, there's something else that's really neat about this. We'll show in a second. Now, we talk about baptisms. So outside, so if you came out the front door and you went this way, this is the stream that goes beside that property. And this is the location that has been traditionally held and passed down as the stream where the women were gathering, where Paul talked to them, and then where she said, I wish to be converted, and she was baptized. So with our group, we had one bus group. That's always the convenient. You do one bus, because otherwise it gets complicated. So this is a pastor from Ohio that was leading this particular thing. So he was leading a remembrance of baptism ceremony and service. So it's short. So we had sort of reserved that space. They kind of do a reservation kind of thing for it. So we reserved that space, and we had about a half an hour little short service, and we went to baptism. We didn't have anybody that needed to be baptized, but it was just like we would have. Pull out your ELW, you've got to remember it's a baptism.
Yeah, but even if you've already been, could you not do it?
You wouldn't be baptized again. You might get in the water, you could, and you could, but if you think about it, what we would proclaim is baptism only happens once, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The rest of it's remembrance of baptism, but that doesn't mean you can't go back in the water and experience being in the water.
And kind of have a renewing.
And renewing, yeah.
Right.
Same thing if people go to the River Jordan and stuff like that. You wouldn't need to be baptized again, because baptism is an event. It's a singular event. But you can remember that and relive that by doing that in that new
Yeah,
place.
but I don't remember it.
Then that becomes right, and you get a variety of reasons people don't. If they were done as infants, and that's an interesting, whole different topic on theology. Is our Baptist cousins? There's some value. There really is to waiting.
Yeah.
The person experiences it themselves when they choose. I am ready and I want to be baptized. There's value to that.
For me, I was gonna do it last June out of the farm that or the ranch that I go to, which is my list I couldn't, so I'm hoping to do
Yeah.
this. But for me, it's it's somewhat of a baptism. I mean, I've been baptized, but as a child, so I don't, as a baby, so I don't remember it at all.
Yep.
So did it mean anything? Yes. But to me, really, did it mean anything?
You
No.
can't emotionally
want
own it
to.
the same.
Right. So I want to do it again
Right.
for me.
And that's why,
Yeah.
whether it's in the Jordan or here or out there, to be able to experience that.
And really feel it. Like,
Yeah.
this is my renewing what I think of it as.
Right.
But that's kind of how I feel.
You know,
for
I
what I want
have
to do this one
Two
again.
particular experiences that as a pastor. So in Michigan, I had a gal that was in her 20s that had a traumatic brain injury in a car accident in her late teens. And she effectively forgot most everything from her earlier life. So it was an interesting conversation. Officially, she had been baptized. And she'd been baptized when she was like 11, just hadn't been part of the Lutheran tradition, but she couldn't remember it. She's like, I want to be baptized. So we did arrange. It's that tweak. So it's taking the remembrance of baptism and doing and saying as we did celebrate. So you're not trying to say it's new and it didn't work. Almost like the Baptist who starts to say didn't count when you were an infant. We can take that and say, as you may have heard or as you might have celebrated, these are those words that you would have shared.
That's what I felt like the catechism and all did for me. My catechism is where I accepted. My baptism is where my parents accepted.
Yes, and that's what we would say. Confirmation is that event where we proclaim our faith. And that's why we always want to say, we are not confirming them. They are confirming their faith. We are witnesses to them confirming their faith. And that's why when I get sometimes moms or dads, or usually it's grandmas and grandmas. Usually it's grandmas. that they get really anxious. You gotta have, they gotta be confirmed. Is this them or is this you? It needs to be them. And you can encourage that, but to say, but every generation, it's like, wait a minute, what are we asking them to do? To take that vow, those same vows of baptism on their own and say, I believe. Do you really want them to say that when they don't believe it, when effectively they'd be lying in church? No, but I want to see them in a dress.
No.
You can just see them try to wrestle. Who is this for?
Right.
It's not for us. It's for them. The other one is my brother-in-law Dale, who passed away last year. Remember that. And as he wasn't in the very tail end of that, but it was probably 6 months or so. And as he was just walking his faith, he asked if we could do a home ceremony for him or something similar. So we, in the bathtub, did a remembrance of baptism for his. That was for his spirit, but it was a remembrance of baptism for something similar in a way, to affirm the faith that he proclaimed, but to be able to have that physical manifestation of experience. This is something else. This is, I'll pass this around, that is a scanned image of this little thing that I just passed around. So you can pass that around so you can see a little bit different. So this is a map of Paul's second journey. So you can see it kind of goes out, stretches up, so, and it's all in Greek, so you got the different cities. Okay, you got, Philippi, and it goes around, and you're down over here, and you're over down to Athens, and you're back and across, and you're back over to Ephesus, and you're back and around. Although it looks a little bit fuzzy, and what kind of artwork is that? Let's take a look at what kind of artwork that is. That is on the floor of the entrance. So in their narthex, you saw one of those things that started to go? This is the floor of the narthex.
Yeah.
And you can see all of these are little, now this is the advantage for being upstairs versus downstairs. You can see it on this wall. On the concrete wall downstairs, you can see it. But you can actually see all the different, the whole thing is inlaid tile.
They don't let you walk on it.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
You walk right in.
Oh, you do?
You just walk right in.
You are walking on it.
Yeah, you walk right over it. You just gotta negotiate if you're trying to walk on it and where anybody else is at. So this is me walking on it, taking a video as I walk and show the path.
Take off your shoes.
You walk in.
Now,
They didn't take theirs off
and
either.
now this is still in Lydia's.
This is in the baptismal chapel, Lydia's baptismal chapel, just on the outside slope of Philippi.
Wow.
Yeah, there's somebody just leaving. Just walking.
Walking with the shoes on.
Yeah, it looks like they would have you to take your shoes off.
Yeah.
Leave your shoes at the door, please.
That's your choice. A neat place. And ties, the appearance of it is so ancient, but that's part of what they try to do. They want to evoke that tradition, the ancientness, the tying this to those 2,000 years of history and elements of the style and not lose it. So we can recognize modern elements of this are very modern, elements of this are very ancient, and they're all combined together, and it goes on for generation to generation.
Did you say we were doing, this
Pardon?
trip to Jerusalem, did you say that? Not you,
Oh,
all of us.
I was gonna say I don't remember that. That'd be fun.
Supposed to have a field trip.
Yes.
Field trip. Going back, I'd love to go back to the Holy Land. Not right now.
Yeah.
No,
There's a
not now.
whole bunch of things
but
got to get resolved in that, but I'd love to go back again. Yeah.
that would be amazing.
So that's Lydia's baptismal location and that history. Now we move to Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki, Thessalonica. One of the things you realize is specifically whose language, whose translation. Some end with an A, some end with an I, some would spell it differently. But you can see where we were, Philippi and Lydia. We're down a little ways. We're curling back south, but it's not too awfully far. And so this Thessaloniki, founded in 315, so it's founded effectively after, there was a little bit of a community here, but it was founded by the husband of the half-sister of Alexander the Great. So he had a half-sister. The guy who married her is the one who founded Thessaloniki and named it after her. So it became, at that time, it went through a large city, Roman capital, so it moved to Rome eventually when the Greek Empire went down and everything else happened and the Romans came up. It became a capital in the province of Macedonia. Macedonia is that upper corner of Greece, is their region, sort of state. Huge port, so Thessaloniki is a major port city. Athens and Thessaloniki are the two biggest cities in Greece. And combination of Roman, Greek, and Jewish culture. Notice here, as you go on, it's on that Via Venetia, second largest city of the Byzantine Empire. The entire Byzantine Empire, second largest city. Constantinople, and then Thessaloniki. And from the 1500s to 1944, it was a majority Jewish. Majority. Not just a high, majority Jewish. When the Nazis took over, they deported 75,000 Jews. And out of that, less than 2,000 survived, returned. Now, some of them got other places, survived, never came back, but a lot of them were sent off to various concentration camps and execution camps. It is still the second largest city in Greece today, population 1.5 million. Biblical connections, and again, it's like the old Athens, we didn't have as many. We got more biblical connections. This is where Paul and Silas visited. They founded a church there on the second journey, and they were looking at both the Jewish and Gentile followers. So this was the combination. So again, in that period of time, there was a good number of Jews there. Philippi didn't seem to have as many Jews. Some of the other ones, so different places had some, different others. But here you had particularly Jewish and Gentile, and this is one of the places they got in trouble. So they were having their little conversations about what to do, and if you remember that, they got talking to the gal who was the prophetess, seer person for some folks who hired her to tell people what was going to happen, and when they set the demon out of her, then she couldn't do it anymore. So the guys were mad because their whole living was done by the fact that the girl couldn't do this prophecy kind of things anymore. So then they got them arrested and then went to jail, and then it was to the jail. And she had all these kind of interesting things. So you have some of that stuff in Philippi, you have some of that stuff. They get in trouble in various places. Paul's first two letters focused on the encouragement of the midst of persecution, Christ's return, and faithful living. This is a view. Rather high up, there is a wall, an old city wall. It's right behind where you can't see it right now. It's right behind where I'm at, taking this picture. But this is looking out over the bay in the port area. And you can see major port infrastructure, and it just, that's this whole thing rolls around. It's a big city. And there's part of the wall. One and a half million people.
Again,
Right
it
up
looks
against
like
the
they're
line.
tall buildings, is that?
It's more modern in many of those, so you can see, unlike Athens, at least part of Athens, you can see that there are taller buildings, and it certainly depends on which directions you go. This is an old fort. It has served lots of different purposes over the years. There are some other things about Thessaloniki, and some of this comes into play. 1430, it was conquered by the Ottomans, became part of the Kingdom of Greece in 1912. Ataturk, the founder of modern-day Turkey, was born in Thessalonica. Then he moved, became Ataturk, founded Turkey. You have one of the oldest sacred buildings. I don't have a picture of that. I don't think I have that. It's called St. Demetrius. It was built in 400 AD. And that particular building was repeatedly burned in fires, damaged in earthquakes, rebuilt multiple times. It was converted to a mosque by the Ottomans in 1490, so it was a church. converted to a mosque. It was a mosque for 500 years. And then in the 20th century, it was converted back to a church again.
Time frames
It's
just
just-
boggle our minds.
Yeah. And the fact that people were willing, so when they converted to a mosque, they didn't tear it down, they re-changed some of the things on the inside, and then when they converted back to a church, they changed some stuff back. It's a good building, it's got good bones, survived all these things, mostly, kind of. The hilltop fortress served as a prison during the entire era of the Suleiman dynasty in the early 1500s. 500 years ago as a prison. It was kind of started as a forest, got used for this, got used for something else. That's part of those old city walls. And that was all, when you start, if you think about where it was at and all the different armies and empires coming back and forth and through and back, you had city walls. Because you wanted to keep the folks out. And if you had a port, if you could get city walls that would protect you from the land side, then you could always get your fishermen and the stuff. So somebody would have to have both a naval power and a land power. That's the advantage if you think about it. If you're right there on the coast, if they only have one of the two, you have a huge advantage because you can either go inland and they can't. And you just say, okay, fine, we'll keep our boats in port and we won't go out. And the other side is, if they already got as a land forces, then you can always get out by the water. Kind of saw that angle a little bit earlier. That's the, this is a really, they got these kind of things in a variety of places. This is just a beautiful, beautiful mural recognizing Paul's trip and his second, part of his second journey. So that's recognizing that trip. So that's just one of those little things that you can find as you're driving around. Now these are neat. Cute little houses. Now there's a different thing here. Look at all the graffiti. Graffiti is everywhere. Sadly, in a way, it is sad to see the sheer volume of graffiti that's all throughout Greece. And you can wonder why. Well, one of the things that you find out as you start to talk is some interesting things. At least, one of the things that I noticed is in Thessaloniki, if you look at the language, you have some of it in English, but you have a lot of it is actually in Greek. When you get to Athens, much of the graffiti is in English. Somewhat different population densities, just different characteristics of the regions as to where. Now most of them speak English. You can talk to most folks, and they haven't been working that much English. But it was just interesting to see that. But it's also how old some of that graffiti can be. And this comes back to the issue of economics. If you remember some of the story when we were talking, and this is why it's important, the issue of their internal civil war in the 1960s, and then the Junta issue, and the economic issues and the challenges, and how many people all of a sudden during the civil war just descended upon Thessaloniki and upon Athens, and you didn't have housing, and you didn't have enough jobs and everything else. Things like graffiti and internal strife go on. Well, as you even start to deal with that, the interesting question becomes, who goes out and cleans up the graffiti?
Apparently no one.
Well, you can say, well, why doesn't the government clean it up? How high on the priority list is hiring people to clean up graffiti?
Well, what does the graffiti say? I mean,
Oh,
is it
sorry,
profane or
some of it
ugly or
is, some of it,
mean?
some of it is both.
Okay.
And it can be all sorts of things. I mean, some of it is political commentary. I mean, when you realize that you've got graffiti, that you've got 30-year-old graffiti out there that's never been cleaned up. It can be a political, social statement from 35 years ago. It's faded, but other stuff is new. And so you've got all sorts of commentary, and it becomes just part of the background. It's kind of like watching the trains going by, and you get the same, you're just like, who's out here spray painting on the sides of trains? But then the train company's got to say, do we keep washing this off? How much money would we spend trying to clean the graffiti off all the trains? So maybe you don't spend your money on that because you're just trying to figure out how to make sure that you got the water running. And that's tough. Now, the other thing that's really neat about this isn't the graffiti, it's the houses. You notice how all these houses have a lower and it jets out and goes up. 20 bonus points for anybody who can come up with a somewhat close answer to why they chose to do that.
Protection.
They mix it with water.
Axes.
Taxes.
Yeah. Footprints.
At the time when some of these things were built, and it goes back in time, they instituted a property tax. They didn't have one before. They instituted a property tax to try to raise funds. And it was based upon the square footage of the house. Not, well, it didn't matter how many floors, it was just the square footage of the land. So people figured out, you can do this, and then in the back and the front, the more you can hang this thing out that you can get away with, you got more space, but you can have to pay for it. So you have these houses that did this. It's just interesting, you know, and then it just kind of hangs around, and that's what you have, you know, 100 years later. History. City walls, the waterfront. This is the more modern waterfront. That is the waterfront from only about 100 years ago, 120 years ago. That's from the early 1900s. In that period of time, this was all protection from naval invasion. So they had a wall, and then they had a wall at the water. Until you got specifically to the little port area, and of course you had to protect that. But what you didn't want is somebody just rolling up. You know, if you had a wall that did here, and that was open, they could just roll right in. So you had a wall all the way along the waterfront. They tore all that down. And now you have, I mean, this is just their version of, you know, Daytona Beach kind of stuff. You know, this is these high rises, and they got the view, and you can imagine what the different cost ratios are for different parts of town and what kind of a view you have. And yeah, somebody back here had a really good view until they passed the Nix law that said, yeah, you could make one of these things that, you know, this was great. And all of a sudden, wait a minute, somebody's putting a 10-story building right in front of me. Yeah. And where's the tax dollars for that? You know, it's the same thing, no matter what country you're in, you get the same thing.
Did they keep just the round?
This is an interesting, this one is the White Tower, and I don't remember all the whole story of it. It's not hugely old, but it was a terminating part of one of the city wall areas. I do remember that. White Tower, 15th century termination point of the eastern wall, connected to the seawall. 15th century. This is one of the lingering things. They liked it, didn't want to tear it down. So this is, if you're standing out on, to go back, you'll notice, if you can, this. This is a promenade. This is when you're standing on the promenade. And they were out doing sculling, regatta racing, practicing while we were out there. It's much more picturesque than it was 100 years ago. That's part of your promenade area. It's very wide. And they've got some neat things. So they've got these little lights and stuff, but they almost echo ship masts. It's very intentional.
Now, is that pedestrian traffic only?
Yes. You do have some little bikes and stuff like this, and of course they can do emergency vehicles if they like, but no, nobody else can ride motorized vehicles out there. That is looking from the waterfront back. So you got that same White Tower. This road goes back, and then you can see how that starts to climb up. So it's not a mountain, but there's a big hill in the back of that. So you've got a lot of visibility from the top of that hill. And a huge monument to Alexander the Great. And you can see the scale of that. Back here, you have parts of that sculpture. These are the shields and their long pikes. This is all sort of this is all modern, so this is sort of an artistic version of the different people like they would have had if you think of some of those things from the ancient Greek style of those, pieces that they would have on the mantles and stuff like that. And so this is huge, huge statue. One other thing on that promenade. So the promenade is a 4-mile curving waterfront. 4-mile long promenade, all just one. So nobody can go right up to the water, so everything has to stop, and then you can get there, and everybody is publicly available, so nobody can say, nope, this is mine. Everybody has access to that promenade.
They don't have hearings like we do.
Uh-uh.
They, oh, this is my beachfront.
Yep. Here's a shrine, another one, to Berea is just outside of Thessaloniki. It's another little area just outside. So this is another shrine to Paul in his travels in the Thessaloniki and Berea area. And it's just beautiful. You really can't capture it. Again, this is all inlaid tile work. And much more modern. So this is not ancient. This is modern. But they try to echo that. What is the style? What's our characteristic? The tile work is so traditional for the Orthodox traditions. A little bit closer. So if I don't know if you can see from there, but if you get to here, you can see all these individual tiny little tiles. All that is individual tiles. And you get the light on that thing, and that gilding to it just gleams.
That's
The other
that
side.
big picture is.
Okay, so this is Paulos, Pi Alpha Lambda, so that's Paulos. So he is speaking to the people in Berea, and they're listening. These are the ones that are listening, the Jewish, and you've got a soldier. So you've got different, each one would be able to have a representation of who they were, one of the women in the back. So these are all listening to Paul speak. That takes us through Philippi and Lydia and Thessaloniki. Any other little thoughts on Thessaloniki?
So remind me, how long did he stay in the?
Thessaloniki, he was 2 years. How long did he stay here? I don't remember how long he was in Thessaloniki.
He wrote to them.
He wrote to them. He had 1st and 2nd Thessalonians.
Right.
So those were 2 letters.
Right.
And so that would have been after. So first he established it, and then later on when he was in the process, some of those were when he was some of the letters were on his way towards Rome for his trial before Caesar. He was writing a bunch of letters, but he wrote some other ones as well. So this trip was his 2nd missionary journey. Then he was writing many of the letters after his 2nd missionary journey, because then he was writing to the churches that he established previously.
In the first round.
Yes. Yep. We've got a little bit of time to start our next one. Corinth and Ephesus. Now Corinth. We're zipping down all the way down here. So there's things in between, and some of it we've already talked a little bit about Mount Olympus, and we've talked about Delphi. We'll get to, we've talked about Thermopylae, so we're kind of hit a bunch of these other things already. We hit Phillips too. Meteora will come back to at the tail end. So now we're still part of Paul's stuff. So now we're down here. And again, one of the things to realize is this waterway, as we had talked about. This is how, during the Roman era and prior, that if you wanted to get in through here, what you didn't want to do is go down to the bottom of the Peloponnese Peninsula, down through there, because that put you out on the Mediterranean proper, and it was much more dangerous. But if you came across this way, the problem was in that era, you would come here. Corinth was right in this little thing, and you would, in some cases, get off of your boat, or if you were a merchant, you'd get the things to take. They had a whole business. They would take everything off the boat, They would scoot that across this dry land area, and then they would put it on another boat. It was cheaper to do that than it was to go all, it was less risky and cheaper to do that than it was to go all the way around the edge. So Corinth, meeting place of the ancient city-states. The earliest settlements in that area go back to 3000 BC. If you might remember the name Asclepion, he was one of the first, so he predates the Hippocratic, so the Hippocratic oath, and that comes after him. But he was one of the first that really studied healing. So there's this whole temple in Corinth. That's where he studied. And it's interesting to see what they did and how much they tried to understand human anatomy and human physiology, and there's a whole bunch of legend stuff that goes with it as well. So where you go back far enough, what's legend and what's real becomes really fuzzy. And you don't have that many, you don't have original text, you have things that were written later about that. Became an independent city-state, huge trading center by the 8th century BC because of where it was at. So, and not only a trading center, but if you came from the west, you could stop in Corinth, drop your stuff, even if you didn't want to send it on. You could have merchants, you could have businesses, you would have that. People from the east would be able to come in from the other side, so it became the central trading hub because anything that came by water could stop at that same location. So you had sort of bartering and trading as a natural location for it. Controlled that isthmus between the two harbors and shipping. It was famous for its philosophers, huge amount of wealth because of where it was, the taxing process, the business issues. It's also at the bottom end, so it became very famous for wonderful wines. It was great weather. You had this whole series of oligarchs that really controlled the city and controlled the region. They were the wealthy, and they emphasized their level of control over everything around them. It also became known as the Sin City of the Ancient World. So if you were realizing that that was the place of excess, that was the Vegas. That was your Vegas, effectively, of the era. Destroyed by the Romans in 146 when they came and invaded. They really tore the thing down. It attempted to defend itself and wasn't successful. And sometimes you take it out on the folks when you're tired of having to fight them, and when you finally break through the walls, you say enough of this and make them pay for it. But they did. And it was rebuilt by Caesar. In the Bible, major Roman city, again, it was rebuilt by Caesar, so it's back to being a big city again, trading hub. But still retained that, and people, you can tear down the city, and then you have a new version of the city, and it gets rebuilt, and it's still in that same spot, so that economic value is still there. So the natural location and everything else means it got rebuilt. Paul visited multiple times, and that's where he worked with Aquila and Priscilla, and his 2 letters there challenged them to deal with internal conflicts, and was looking for guidance, to share them guidance on moral issues, given where they were, the temptations to be similar to the culture in which they were with. So we had the where. This is just north of Corinth, on the way from Athens into Corinth, but this gives you just a view of those mountain ranges. Now, Delphi would be sort of that-ish way, but further up, you just can't see it. But you have this, you can sort of see this dry characteristic to the land. And olive trees. This is just, whenever you're driving anywhere, you just see this. These are just olive trees. They're just everywhere. And large numbers, small numbers. You go past a business park and you got the business, you got the office complexes and you got olive trees in between them. And they're just everywhere. And yes, they would go harvest the olive trees in the business park. Yep. That's looking south from that same road. Beautiful area. I mean, you can see, there's a reason people like that Mediterranean coastline. It's nice weather. It can be hot, but it's a beautiful place, and you get the water right there. And now we have that entrance sign. As we had mentioned previously, you've got the entrance in Greek and in English. Very, very consistent. This is the Corinth Canal.
Wow.
Now, back 600 years before Jesus, Periander, he was a beneficial tyrant. Yeah, he was a tyrant. Don't cross him. But he was not intentionally abusive. He liked, his interest was how do we have good governance? How do we have services? How do we take advantage of our location? How do we appropriately tax the traders? How do we encourage good business for the region? So that manner of speaking, he attended to the needs of the community, but he was in charge. He conceived of a canal, but they didn't have the technology to do this, because what you can see is what they would have to dig through and cut through to do. But he's the one that started the 5-mile-long track. 600, so 5 miles from one waterway to the other waterway. So they created a track. And that was something that then once you got on it, and they could, with rollers and a variety of things, and you could get the horses and stuff like this, and they would be able to haul your goods, almost like an early version of a train track. You could haul them one way, haul them back the other way, so that you could put things between the two different. And it ran until 100 AD. And they made money on it. Everything that went across that track got a little bit of money, and that's how Corinth became wealthy. Nero is the one that started the idea of a canal. Nero was then roughly that 60-ish AD Roman Caesar. He began construction, but they still didn't really have the capability and technology, and he died. Combination of how much work that was and the fact that he died before it could be completed. Various folks over 1,800 years started little bits of it over and over again, and then they'd die off and this and that and the other, but it was hard work. Completed in 1893.
What astounds me is the trees growing out.
Oh yeah, they'll find, all they take is a little bitty tiny spot and they'll grow.
Here comes a tree.
Beautiful image though, I love this. It just had to happen to be there when they had this little catamaran coming through. So it's 4 miles long. This little crevice goes for 4 miles. 80 feet wide and that high, and they had to cut that out. That was a huge amount of work. Now at this point in the modern era, this is for little tour boats and pleasure boats. You're not putting commercial vehicles through. They can't fit. It's not economical. You don't need to now. So it's mostly tourism and just that image and memory of what it was. Now this is looking at Corinth and the ancient. So up at the top is the Corinth Acropolis, and you can just barely see there's a little bit of bumpy up there. That was the fortress at the top of the Corinth Acropolis. This is the city of ancient Corinth. The bottom, it is rubble and ruin. But there's still pieces of it. So this was known as the Bema. So this was the speaking sort of platform. And they've recreated pieces of it, and they've got some of the so this is more like what that would have been eventually at one time. This was beautifully all done in marble. It was just gorgeous. Again, it's the remembrance that what we see now are those ruins. So that was the Bema of where you would have the speaking. A little home. You have an entryway, and inside of that there, I think they found a statue of sort of somebody who might have been sort of welcoming you in.
Tiny house.
Yep. You have the 7-column temple to Apollo, 8th century BC, is one of the oldest in the country. Goes back a long ways. That's Kim with an image of parts of Corinth behind us. They have a museum there, so this is really thing. So it's nice to be able to have an indoor area where these things are protected and you can see it. So what you have here is some of these different statuary area of the time. So what we have is this particular one. That one is, people believe, as best as we understand that, it's a statue of Artemis. Teenager, female, a little bit of shape you can see, not strong busted, a little bit more of a tomboy. But that follows sort of the mythology of Artemis. So kind of neat for that. She was the athletic, she was the huntress, so that kind of follows her sort of style. So they believed that was Artemis. This is part of the museum area for Asclepius, the surgeon, and one who was the healer. So these are all things that they have found. So they have models of human anatomy, of hands, of different kinds of things that could go wrong. How would you do surgery? Understanding what some of the bones, I mean, these are all parts of how did they analyze the human body, even in that era, trying to understand what would we do, how would we help heal somebody. Now these are kind of, this is one of the Romans. So this one is the wall frieze of, they believe it's, that one is known to be Valerius, one of the Roman emperors, not Greek. This is really cool. All of these are marble statues. They're all missing their heads. Now, some of them it looks like it's broke off, but you notice that doesn't really look broke off. Anybody know why? It was really common to create a body and then have a separate head that you could put in. A couple different reasons. One, different skill sets. So somebody could be working on heads because you wanted that to be more accurate in sort of whatever your implementation was. You might have a slightly more junior person working on the body, more senior person, more skilled person working on the head. But the other thing about having a separate head is that it could be changed.
Yeah, you could interchange them.
You could interchange it. So you might get the body, you pick the body that you want, and then you get somebody to put your head on it. And this was really common. They have well-known examples of certain, particularly Roman emperors, who came and got, because they loved the Adonis version of the body. They weren't Adonis anymore, but they loved the Adonis body, and then they had their head stuck on the Adonis statue. So you have to realize, Photoshop of the 5th century BC is still real. It's, you know.
Snapchat.
Oh yeah. But over time, you also had either getting knocked off, because that is the easiest and most fragile thing. So even if it was there, it could get either intentionally removed or knocked off, or someone else comes through and they don't like that emperor, and that emperor's now gone, so you whack the head off. I mean, everything that goes with it. Just kind of. Fun little tidbit. Back to the thing about stuffing. Part of the myth. He was born unnaturally by cesarean section, son of Zeus. Part of the mythology. He became the divine healer. According to myth, he was so successful that no one ever died, and Hades complained because people weren't going to hell anymore.
Legend.
You're too good. So he even did brain surgery. He promoted healthy lifestyle. He was very focused on appropriate foods and exercise.
That's for the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
He studied without really understanding chemistry, but he tried to study using medicines and natural things, snake venom and other things like that. I mean, these are all pieces of things that at least go back to some understanding of some of the things that he did when he was. Now this is, what do you notice here? Menorahs. This is a lintel with the menorah on it from a synagogue. Tile work. There's more tile and more heads.
Yeah, there must be like a bunch of heads somewhere.
Yeah. Yep. Some of them missing noses. Noses get broke off. I mean, there's a lot of neat things. There's a lot more photos that we could have in there. There's what's known as Cory statues. Cory statues were some of the burial statues, but you can't take pictures of them. When you're in that that area of the museum has no photography. So you couldn't see it, but the Corey statues are amazingly lifelike and appropriately sized.
Wonder if they're, mummified or whatever.
No,
That's
it's-
why
it's-
you can't take.
No, the statues are carved. They're carved
Okay.
stone.
Okay.
But it's considered, unlike these other ones which were just for people, the Corey statues are particularly burial sacred art. So it's honoring the element of the burial to say this area doesn't have, you can see it, you can look at it, but don't take pictures. But you would see they were naked, fully proportional, lifelike, had braided hair, their hands were always to their sides, very peaceful, blank eyes, no pupils or irises. Interesting. For the Corey statues, there was just a flat eye. Now they knew how to make really, really compelling sculpture, but the Corey statues, they were one of those little things you see that's one of the ways you would know is part of it. Other things from outdoors. Arena. There was areas where they had ancient baths. This one had golf on it. I think that's enough. We're about 5 after. That gets us finished with Corinth. And so next time we'll go to Ephesus. That will be our visit next time.
Awesome, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Keep going so we can see it. Did you have an opportunity to talk to the native people there, and did you find them friendly, or?
I would say universally yes. Not just our guide, but wherever. I mean, I like to talk to people. Kim's more shy, so I talk to anybody. To talk to folks that were often in the hotels. You start to say, what's your opportunity to talk to whom? Sometimes it's a small business person. Again, most all of us spoke English. Some of them, one hotel that we were at, it was a beautiful hotel. It had been a military officers' hall at some point in time. You can bring how many different things you can bring in. This time it was a hotel. I kind of felt for them though. It's like anywhere else, you're dependent upon tourists and business, and they put out a spread for us. When we arrived, they had probably 6 different hotel staff, all dressed really nicely. They had little sort of hors d'oeuvres and nice little warm towel kind of things for you, and they just just welcomed us and stuff. And you realize they're all here. They've got this busload of folks. And they were happy to talk and stuff like this, and again, talk about the food and everything else, about the city and what you might do. But I also just got this, it was just this little impression of how this was not a full hotel. It wasn't full. How much business they got from this one busload coming in. And if they can do a good job for us, we share it. And how does our tour guide know? And bring back another tour the next time, and it was just understanding a little bit of business and some of those factors. That was a beautiful facility, and great folks. I mean, that's just one example. Yeah, but we never met anybody that was unpleasant. You do have to be careful. You got lots of beggars. There's folks, and they struggle with that. Some of those are immigrants, some of those are native, a lot of them are immigrants they're struggling with, and you don't give them anything. Not a good choice, and be very, we had money belt kind of things that you put on underneath. You don't want to be wandering around with your wallet in your back pocket. Keep your phones in. So I have traveling pants when I go.
Well, that's
zippable
anywhere you go.
and little,
And we get to, they tell it,
Yeah.
pickpockets are
Oh, yeah.
everywhere.
and you
Do
can,
not put your stuff, Terry, we bought him Velcro
yeah,
shorts and stuff.
yep, zippable things where it's all in front and it
all
closes
in the
up. They can't
front.
just slip a hand in. And
Yeah, yeah.
Universal. It's pretty much everywhere you go.
And you